We now continue with Smurf.
I have worked at Disney World in Florida for quite some time now. Around 10 years or so in total, so a lot of the more tenured staff would still consider me to be a newbie rather than a veteran. Some people have worked for Disney their entire lives in parks, no joke. It's honestly quite insane to think about. But I would like to think that I know enough about the operations here and how things work to be able to call out something strange and call someone on their BS. I have one experience like this while working here that happened around the year 2018 or so. I'm not sure exactly how important the timing of this is, but I thought it best to mention it anyway. It happened during the summer. Now, I work as a resort housekeeping inspector, which is just a fancy way of saying that I'm a lackey who has to make sure that the hotels, the room turnover, and all of the processes involving the hotels for guests run as smoothly as possible. You wouldn't think that a job such as this would carry so much stress, but I have to juggle so many unreliable staff. Some who turn up for their first day and do not even speak fluent English. You know when you get a worker who needs another worker to translate what you said for them, then it is going to be a headache of a day. So, alongside this, I also get sent in when there is a problem. I get dispatched after scheduled checkouts to verify cleanliness, to make sure these idiots don't just spray some air freshener and plump some pillows and be done with it. I have wandered into rooms after a supposed cleanup, only to be met with massive streaks of shit and diarrhea all inside the toilet. I also check for missing items or damage or if maintenance needs to take a look at any problems. It's all about preserving the magic and not letting people see behind the curtain, or at least, that is the line they feed to us in training. I am supplied with a master key that lets me access almost any room to ensure efficiency and to make sure that nothing is amiss. So I am just filling out some forms and attending to some other business in the vicinity, and I get a call over the radio. I am told that there is a room that was due to be checked out multiple hours ago. I think maybe 3 or 4 hours by this point, but that the resident is not responding to knocks or calls, and the door is set to do not disturb. I ask why the cleaner has not just let themselves in already. If you're not familiar, Disney has a very strict policy that every single occupied room must be entered at least once every 24 hours by a staff member as a security measure. Even if there is no response, a staff member is to open the door, conduct a quick visual check, and then leave. Even if do not disturb, or room occupied as the message now displays, is triggered by the guest, it does not guarantee privacy because of safety concerns. Someone higher up than me tells me to head down and check it out. Cue my anger and panic when I get there, and I am told that for the entire week this guest has been staying here. Absolutely no one has entered. If something goes wrong now, it is me that is in deep shit. I rounded up every single one of the little bastards and asked what went wrong, why I was not informed, and why basic protocol had not been followed by people who should know what they were doing by now. The responses that I got to that question were mixed, to say the least. Front desk told me that the room was flagged as empty and not available for bookings until literally this morning, and she thought it was maybe a system glitch. One cleaner said her keycard would not buzz her in and that the lock remained red when she tried to open up the door. Upon seeing this, she reported to someone higher up than me, further up the chain than me. She did this on purpose because she thinks I'm an asshole and wants me in trouble and fired, and she was apparently told that it was being taken care of and to leave the room alone for the next week. The others just did not have a clue because they were useless idiots who could not wipe their own asses without an instruction manual. I told them all to get back to work and that there would be a mandatory disciplinary meeting at the end of the shift. So I headed to the room door myself and get a loud and rapid knock, one that you could still hear even with noise-cancelling headphones. I announced myself once, twice, to no response, and I said screw it. I swiped my card. What the hell? It didn't work. I swiped it again and again and again, and only on the 5th or 6th try of swiping it did it finally register and finally unlock the door. The room was empty when I walked in. After a quick visual check, I should have just let the cleaners do their job and give my supervisor a heads up, but I noticed some really weird details that I just could not shake off. The room appeared to be clean on the surface, but there were little marks here and there that were missed. It was like someone tried to clean up and cover their tracks but were stopped halfway through and had to just leave in a hurry. The first thing I noticed were the flagrant muddy boot prints that were embedded into the carpet. Like you know when something heavy leaves an indent in its shape once it has sat there for a while, applying pressure to the ground. It was like this, but with these boot prints. They walked along one side of the bed, and they looked like they came out of the bathroom. After that, they get kind of smudged. I assume where someone attempted to scrub them. But then they just disappear. I could see the bleach stains on the carpet that completely discolored it. Whoever did it was desperate and was not using their brain. The bed was made. The sheets looked pretty much unused, until I pulled the covers off of the bed. They were these dark red, almost maroon-looking stains near the middle. It looked about the size of a person's head, but there was no obvious imprint of a body part. There were also a couple of flecks on the undersides of the pillows that had been forgotten about. By this point, I was really starting to panic. I decided I would continue searching, while rehearsing my story in order to not lose my job. I needed to search the place top to bottom, and come up with some kind of explanation as to why I managed to fail in my basic duties. I was also hoping to find if there was anything else strange before my supervisors, so I could just be, ready. I checked the bathroom next, since that is where the footsteps seemed to originate from. There was nothing in any of the cupboards. There were no toiletries or any other hygiene products. None of the hotel-issue towels were there or lying around anywhere. The place looked completely spotless, and the shower looked unused. You can usually tell because even if you try really hard, you will always end up leaving some hair behind in the drain that you cannot reach easily, or some other kind of residue. What I did notice eventually was the toilet. Behind all of the toilets in the rooms were plumbing access panels that we have to check for maintenance. I could see that the screws on this panel had been left completely unscrewed. The screws were not even in sight. Now that I was looking closer and paying attention, I noticed some very visible scuff marks on the floor, where it looks like something has been scraped along the floor. I have no idea how I did not spot this instantly. I reached over to pull off the access panel, just to take a look, but I could not find any signs of damage or foul play. It wasn't until I was trying to prop the bastard back up without it falling that I slipped slightly and had to lean on the toilet to stop myself from falling. When I did this, I ended up moving the toilet forward a few inches, and I heard a horrible screeching that made my ears cringe. This should not be possible, but for some reason, this toilet was not screwed down or connected to any plumbing. I checked the access panel again. It was all a dummy. Nothing actually connected. It was just meant to appear all in order so that no one would look too deeply or flag anything. I decided to pull the toilet away from the wall to take a closer look. I saw that directly behind it, there was some kind of hatch or other panel, which made my heart sink. It looked just about big enough for me to fit my head through. This hatch also had holes for screws, but they had not been replaced either. I had to take deep breaths just to stop myself from panicking and losing my shit, but I eventually managed to compose myself and stuck my head through the hatch. There was a horrible stench. It smelled like something that had been rotting for years. There was also a ladder that looked to lead down into some kind of a service corridor. Let me just stress that nothing of the sort should be in any guest hotel room. None of the utilidors that we use ever connect anywhere close directly to the guest rooms. This did not look like it connected to the usual utilidors that staff used to move around the park undetected by guests. This was completely split off from any other staff tunnel. That was all I needed to say. I knew at this point I was going to lose my job, so I just put the toilet back and continued searching the room. I wish that was the worst thing that I found, but somehow it wasn't. I ripped the entire room apart, top to bottom. I took apart the sheets. I pulled the mattress off of the bed. I searched every drawer. Once I removed the mattress, I noticed that there was something that had been left underneath the bed. It looked like some kind of carry-all bag. Once I reached down and pulled it out, I realized it was a duffel bag. Whoever left it must have been either an idiot or in a serious hurry. It contained cash. I have no idea exactly how much, but it was tied up with elastic bands, stacked with 20s. It had to be more than I earned in a year. Buried somewhere in the bottom of the bag, and I am very thankful I put on disposable cleaning gloves when searching in here, was a firearm. It looked to be a H&K P30 that did not look to even have so much as a scratch on it. When I reached in and felt something solid, I was wondering what the hell it was, but the second I pulled it out of the bag and saw it, I practically pissed my pants in fear. I should have gotten the hell out of there and alerted someone higher up than me the second I saw the boot prints. Never mind finding a damn handgun in a bag. I kind of felt responsible though, and I wasn't thinking straight. Whatever had gone on here was my fault, and I felt like I just needed to know before I got my ass chewed out and spat onto a plate. I continued searching the other pockets of the bag. I could not really find any of her personal belongings, aside from some pamphlets and other bits like that from around the park. When I opened up the very back pocket though, I found a small folder filled to the brim with photographs. These were printed out photographs of just various different people. There were pictures of men, women, and even couples and families together. And they looked like they had been taken using the Disney PhotoPass photography service that we have around the park. These are only uploaded to a person's Disney Experience account though, and there should be no way for anyone to get these. I am not aware of any staff database that someone can access to see any of these photos. There was no magic band in the bag, and these obviously did not belong to this person. These printed photos had been written on in black marker. There were what I presume were names scribbled alongside each person, along with dollar amounts. After these dollar amounts, that were usually way higher than my yearly salary, there was some kind of shorthand code. This code was always written in a series of 2 letters and 2 single-digit numbers. I think at the bottom of one of the photographs, I think I recall something like GEPBDTI-FE1213-EHL11. Obviously that's not exactly right, that's just from memory. That's more of an approximation, that's what the format would look like. It read more like some kind of checkout coupon code, and I could not make heads or tails of it. But to me now, in retrospect, it almost looked like some kind of a menu. By this point my stomach was in knots. The anxiety was so strong in my stomach, I felt like I was going to shit my pants. The wardrobe was also incredibly strange. There were lots of outfits in there that no regular guest should have access to. I am talking about full cast costumes and uniforms. I am talking a uniform similar to mine. I'm talking a full Mickey Mouse costume that looked like it belonged directly to the park. It had to. It had that distinct funk smell of someone wearing it and sweating inside of it for hours on end that is so hard to wash out. There were bits of mud on the hands of this Mickey costume, and there were costumes of a few other male characters as well, like Goofy and Donald. Also, in this wardrobe was what looked to be a custom-tailored suit, and a maid costume, and what looked to be a dress for one of the Disney princesses, but it was in a pretty big size. The last item in the wardrobe was a black t-shirt that had Mickey Mouse himself emblazoned on it. Only it had slight discoloration marks near the neckline. They were what looked to be bleach stains. The last thing I found almost made me vomit, and I instantly shot out of that room and finally called my higher-ups down to the room. In these rooms, you typically have Disney-themed prints or canvases or bits of artwork hung around the room. I don't even know why I thought to check it. I guess it just looked off. But I remember this framed illustration of all of the cars from the Cars movie. It wasn't massive, but it looked a little bit too low to the ground compared to where they would be typically hung. And I don't know, I took it off of the wall. And to anyone else, they would have just thought, yeah, just a patch of wall that they hung something over instead of painting, because it was a different color. But I was on such high alert that I just pushed it, and it turned out to just be a panel covering up a hollowed out bit of wall. I know this is going to sound like some stupid and contrived cliche straight out of a shitty movie, but I swear that this is what I saw. For some reason, placed on some kind of dinner plate that looked pretty fancy, was a folded up note written on yellow paper. It had a "to" and then a name written on the front that I cannot recall for the life of me, and that is how I know. Another few stacks of dollar bills, and then a literal human hand. I only got a look for a couple of seconds before I realized what I was actually looking at, and then I shoved the panel back in and put the photo back over it and dashed out of there. It looked, how do I even explain it? It looked glossy, like it had been preserved in something. It was severed but clearly not fresh, but also showing no signs of any decay. I still have no idea what it means. I pushed the duffel bag back under the bed and made sure the toilet was pushed back up just so I could pretend not to know the severity. I don't really remember my thinking behind it. All I know is I was well and truly scared. I radioed this into my superiors discreetly on a channel that was not open to all workers. All I mentioned was the missing overdue guest and the mud on the carpet and the specific room number. 2 of them were down there, lightning quick. I had never seen such a response from higher-ups. Normally, these guys are allergic to actually doing anything themselves, but the second they heard the room number, they said they would be right down. Before they even set foot in the room, they grilled me and asked me to describe exactly what the situation is and what I saw. I told them exactly what I told you, up until the point of the mud, except I told them that I spotted the mud from the door and did not go any further. I figured coming clean earlier about nobody checking the room every 24 hours as per policy was the best thing that I could do. Neither of them even looked concerned when I told them that detail though. They told me to wait there and to make sure nobody interrupted. I think I waited for around half an hour before they came back out and actually sealed the room and put along some tape to cordon it off as needing maintenance. They told me I did the right thing by telling them first, and that I was under strict orders not to mention it to anyone. They said all of us would be in deep shit if it got out to anyone else. I did as I was told, kind of. I asked the front desk about swipes into that specific room. I was told that until me, just recently, there was only ever one swipe into that room. One guest let themselves in, but they never opened the door again. There was no record of any room service or anything of the sort. The system was basically telling us that the guest sat in their room for a week straight. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. And now, just missing. I asked if she remembered the guy, but she said no. Makes sense. You see so many people it's hard to remember a face, let alone any specific details. Would you believe me if I told you that was basically the end of it? I did not dare ask my higher-ups again, and I couldn't exactly speak to other staff. That room, after what must have been a month or 2, eventually got put back into rotation again. None of what I found the first time was there anymore. The toilet was screwed back to the wall. There was no hollowed out part of the wall anymore. No nothing. Just a regular old room again. I wish I had a better explanation, and that my story did not end like this with just no resolution. Again, this is the only time I have ever come across anything like this in all of my years here. If any of you have worked at Disney before, or just have any other kind of theories or explanations for me, that would be really helpful. Hey, hope you've enjoyed the story so far. If you want to hear more, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment because it lets YouTube know you like the content and helps more people to see these videos. My next big goal for the channel is 100,000 subscribers, and as a celebration, I will be doing a Q&A video once we hit that goal. Thank you, and back to the stories. In September of 2003, my mom decided to take me to Disneyland for the weekend to take my mind off of things, and honestly, it was exactly what I needed. I was hugely into Disney movies as a kid, and although I had been to Disneyland a few times before, Being so stressed around the house meant seeing it again was like seeing it for fresh eyes. I took pictures with as many of the characters as I could, and each ride my mom and I went on seemed to alleviate my anxiety and depression a little bit more. The whole first day was going wonderfully well, at least until we got in line to ride the Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. I am pretty sure it was about 11:30 by the time we got into the little rail cars for the ride itself, and everything was going smoothly at first. We were speeding along all of these twists and turns until we hit the fake little desert setup, and then went up an incline into a dark tunnel. I remember feeling this jolting sensation shake the cars while we were in the dark, and then there was this horrible grinding of metal and a thud before people in the cars in front of us started screaming. Everything came to a sudden stop, and everyone was really shaken up from it. But then I heard some of the worst things I have ever heard in my life. This woman started asking out loud, Mark, wake up, Mark." And we were all mostly in the dark, but there was a little bit of light coming from the tunnel openings on each side of us. I remember seeing how some of the cars were not even on the tracks anymore, and the cars in front of us were all wet and shiny with some kind of fluid, a fluid that I would only later realize was someone's blood. In the moments after the rail cars came to a stop, people started clambering out of them and walking down the tunnel as fast as they could, calling out that someone was hurt really badly and that we needed help up there as soon as possible. As my mom and I climbed out of the rail car and followed, I could see the train car at the very front of the coaster had derailed and that the rear of it had mounted the car behind it. It was only then that I realized whoever was in the car behind it would have taken the full force of that thing as we sped up that incline. There were also people in the cars ahead of us who were trapped by it, stuck in the rail cars and unable to get out because of the way they were positioned in the tunnel. Thankfully, my mom and I were not trapped, so we could just get out of there. But I think it took another half hour before firefighters could get them out so that paramedics could treat them before taking them to the hospital. All the people who could get out were herded off by park staff toward the River Bell Terrace, where a medical treatment area had been set up. Like I said, my mom and I were mostly okay, just a little shaken up from the whole thing, but there were people with some pretty serious injuries who had not been so lucky. We later found out that the guy who had been in the first car had actually died of his injuries. It is horrendously tragic that someone should lose their life when all they wanted to do was go to Disneyland to have some fun on a few roller coasters. I know it's kind of messed up for me to think of it like this, but we got really lucky that day, as way more people could have died. I used to work as a custodian at Disney World in Orlando back in 1999. My job was mostly cleaning the park when it closed, emptying trash, and treating water features so that they would not get gross. Sometimes I had to interact with guests, giving directions and answering endless questions about the park. I'd say my job was 70% janitor and 30% walking information booth. Being a custodian meant I could walk all over the park, within reason. If a guest needed directions to Space Mountain, I could walk them over to Tomorrowland instead of just telling them. This was especially helpful for guests who did not speak English. The team felt like one big family, which made the job a lot more enjoyable. That's why what happened next still messes me up, even 21 years later. It was the second weekend of February in 1999, and the park opened at 11 a.m. We spent the first few hours of our shifts doing cosmetic cleaning, testing rides, and getting everything ready. That morning, I was helping clean and prep Tomorrowland. I saw Ray, a cheerful older guy on our team, up on the Skyway platform in Fantasyland, sweeping and whistling. Ray was in his 60s and had been with us for about a year. Everyone liked Ray because he was friendly, laid back, and always willing to help. We worked together, partied together, and some of us even lived together. I called up to him morning, and he smiled, waved, and went back to sweeping. It was a beautiful morning, and everyone was in a good mood. As I walked toward Tomorrowland, I heard the electric whirring of the Skyway starting up above me. The gondolas were moving along the track, and I did not realize right away that something was wrong. It was a Sunday morning, and I was tired and a little bit hungover from drinking with coworkers the night before. For a long time, I blamed myself for not preventing what happened. I thought if I'd been sharper, I could have helped. Suddenly, I realized the gondolas were moving fast on their first test loop, and Ray was still on the platform. Someone had switched on the skyway without checking if the platform was clear. I started running back toward the platform, hoping to catch up to Ray before the gondolas reached him. I ran as fast as I could, but I could not close the distance in time. I looked up and saw Ray whistling with his back to the gondolas, completely unaware that they were coming. I shouted to warn him before the gondolas knocked him off the skyway, which was about 60 feet up. Ray heard me, turned around, and looked horrified when he saw the gondolas coming. He had a mix of anger and fear in his voice as he tried to move away from the gondola. He could not move fast enough, and the gondola caught up with him. Ray grabbed onto the gondola and tried to pull himself inside to avoid falling. He was not strong enough, and suddenly, he was dangling from the gondola, 60 feet above the concrete. I shouted up to him, "Hang on, Ray, just hang on," but there was nothing I could do. I watched him struggle to hold on, knowing it was only a matter of time before he lost his grip. Ray looked down at the ground below, and I will never forget the terror on his face or how helpless I felt. The gondola started passing over flower beds instead of concrete, and I figured the soil would be a better place to fall. I shouted, "Jump, Ray, jump for the flower beds," hoping he would make it. I don't know if Ray let go on purpose or just lost his grip, but he fell 60 feet down. He landed with a loud thump in the flower beds, and it looked like slow motion as he fell. When I reached him, Ray was not moving at all. He lay among the flowers, glassy-eyed, wheezing and groaning in pain. Before I ran to get help, I saw him spit up blood onto his lip and chin. I was in tears when I found another cast member and begged them to call 911 for an ambulance. Emergency services arrived in less than 20 minutes and took Ray to Orlando Regional Medical Center. We all hoped he would be okay, and it helped that he landed in the flower beds instead of on concrete. A few hours later, we got the word that Ray did not make it. His injuries were too severe, and he passed away despite the hospital staff's efforts. The fall caused too much trauma and internal bleeding, and he slipped away after surgery. We were devastated to lose such a cheerful and dedicated cast member. This happened to me when I was about 15 years old. My dad ran a wrecker service for over-the-road truckers. Late one night, we got a call that a truck had run off the road and struck a tree 20 miles south of town. So my dad and I fired up the wrecker and headed south. When we came on the scene, the truck and trailer had ran off the road to the right and smacked a tree head-on. It was one of those 100-year-old oak trees. This was back in the day when there were cab over semi-trucks or the ones without noses or the engine is underneath the cab. The truck was still running at idle, the door was closed, but no driver was seen from the driver's windows. The front driver's windshield was busted, and there was a large hole in the middle. The trailer was loaded with flat, 1/4-inch sheet steel. Of course, it is pitch dark, and you can't really see things that well when we first got there. Our impression was the driver smacked a tree, hit his head on the windshield, and was already getting treatment somewhere. So my dad set up the wrecker to hook onto the trailer, and he wanted me to open the cab in order to release the brakes. When I opened up the door, I was greeted with a lower half of a body. When the driver hit the tree, a single sheet of steel broke free and cut through the cab, cutting the driver in half. The upper half of his body went through the windshield. I found the driver's upper half in a cornfield about 40 feet away from the truck, and he was still grabbing the upper part of the steering wheel. It looked like he was frozen in time, still driving the truck. Needless to say, he went into a body bag with his lower half, and we worked through the night, getting the truck and trailer back into town. This is just one of many experiences I had growing up in a wrecker service family. Last Sunday, some friends and I went to our favorite hiking spot. Only a few serious dog walkers go there because it's so uphill both ways. On our way back up the main trail, we saw a really beautiful spot between the trees. It had a bunch of moss-covered rocks and wildflowers, So my friend Chuck decided to go in, and while the rest of us started to follow, my girlfriend says, "What's that in the trees?" I look up, and there is a deer/goat head hanging from a branch. I am not sure which one it was. Probably a deer since they are so abundant here. It was almost right above my head. It was tied onto the branch by a long flap of neck skin. So I noped for a second and did not tell her what it was. My friend started to inspect it, so instead of staying quiet, I had to tell her what it was. Well, we just kept on going because it was going to get dark soon. I did not have my camera sadly, but I am going back on Sunday with weapons for a little investigating. Chances are it's nothing paranormal, but still, you gotta be pretty messed up in the head to hang a deer head on a tree branch by its neck skin. I forgot to mention, but it could not have been more than a day or so old. I did not see any fresh blood, but it was not quite decomposing yet. It still had its eyes. We did not see it on the way down the trail, but chances are we did not notice it.